I also serve as Appropriations Commission, and we welcome you all here today. We have a jam-packed program, and I want to open up with a quick word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for this beautiful Saturday morning, these beautiful people that have joined this Zoom convening. First, we lift up our beloved actress Regina King and her family and the loss of her son, and all the families who have lost loved ones. We also lift up President Joe Biden and all the elected officials as they take on the mantle to build this community back better. We dedicate this convening to the late and great state President Dr. Willie Blair, who I'm sure is smiling down on us and very happy that we're doing this, and all of the ancestors that have gone before us. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. I want to introduce you to our organizer, our own BAPAC San Diego board member, Miss to be Dr. Abina Stevenson. She is the owner of and president of Rapid Response Mortgage and Rapid Response Realty. To you, we turn it over. Thank you so much, Abina.
Thank you too. Good afternoon, everybody. And before we get started, I would like to ask all BAPAC members and board members to go down into the reaction column and put your yellow hand up so we can see who you are. I'd like to thank the chair of BAPAC San Diego, Ellen Nash, for asking me to coordinate this event on behalf of BAPAC. I would also like to thank Jason Berkovich from Congressman Scott Peters' office for his enthusiastic co-coordination. Traditionally, we would do a who's who in the room opening. Due to the nature of this meeting and the wealth of information being delivered, we are requesting all attending to enter their name, contact information, organization in the chat. This will provide the documentation of who's in the room. If you are seeking office for this upcoming election cycle, also place your information in the chat, and we thank you for that. I would also like to send out a thank you to the staff of each elected official present. Those staff members navigated through multiple schedule challenges and appearance demands to make this event possible. Thank you, and a special thank you to Regina Brown Wilson for navigating the appearance of our Caltrans director. And as a note, the Federal Reserve has predicted African Americans will be the largest community to lose their homes post-pandemic. We would like to thank Regina Brown Wilson, who is the Executive Director for California Black Media, for joining BAPAC San Diego in a partnership with the Black Media and California Housing Finance Agency, which we call CalHEFA. We're going to increase the awareness of available services offered by the National Mortgage Settlement Program through HUD certified counselors. Please check our website for participating HUD certified counselors for rental and mortgage assistance. And our website is bapacsd.org, BAPACSD.org. We are welcoming all to this historical, unprecedented, intergovernmental transparency event. Government works when we work. We are following the money from the halls of Congress to the kitchen table. Infrastructure is the foundation for which we all function, such as roads, bridges, waterways, internet, and the list goes on. Then we must be service providers as well as users of these services. The African American community, often called the underserved community, must have every opportunity to participate at every level. To guide us through this roadmap is our own Eugene Mitchell, who we like to call Mitch, who is Senior Vice President of Diversity and Community Partnerships at SEMPRA, and a longtime supporter of BAPAC. Mitch will introduce our distinguished officials and moderate this historic event. Follow the money from the halls of Congress to your kitchen table. And one last note, all questions for our Q&A, please put in chat, which will be monitored by Jason Berkovich from Congressman Scott Peters' office, as well as Mitch, our moderator. Thank you, and Mitch, you're up.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I want to say to everybody, good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here to moderate this discussion. And more importantly, it's a pleasure to see the interest from everybody about the information you're going to learn today. This is a once in a generation moment, as I've told my colleagues and friends, to see this opportunity and to be at the doorstep of seeing real change happen to the long time discussion points around infrastructure is exciting. And I want to give credit to BAPAC and Ellen. You've put together a fantastic agenda for today. And I want to say thank you ahead of time to the elected officials who you actually see the value of this conversation. You see the value of the flow of information coming to the residents of this region to better understand what is before us. And so, I know we have a really long agenda, but I will make a couple of comments about who you're going to hear from today. And we start out today with a longtime friend of mine. I've known her since 1992. She's watched my kids grow up. Our own Senate Pro Tem, someone who is instrumental to good things, great things happening in the San Diego region and her role in Sacramento. And she's someone who I've always said has always been calm in the storm. But she's also been incredibly important when those windows of opportunity have opened in Sacramento. I know the governor respects her, and I think we've seen the benefits of her demeanor and her leadership come here to San Diego recently. We also are going to hear from our congressional delegation members, and many of them, two of them I've known for a long time, and that is Congressman Juan Vargas, who I've known since his first election in 1993. And when he was wearing out shoe leather, and Congressman Scott Peters, who I had a wonderful opportunity to work with at City Hall when he was council president, and our newest member of the delegation, one Miss Sarah Jacobs, who I haven't had a chance to get to know us deeply, but I look forward to all the conversations we will have, and obviously have spent a lot of time with her family. We also have the luxury of having our Board of Supervisors present today, and this is important because this time period that we're going through is going to take the collective effort of our delegation. And that's important for everybody to remember. The collective effort of our delegation to truly create the outcomes that we so desire and we need and that are long overdue. And it also will start with our County Board of Supervisors. And I know that we are excited to hear from Nora Vargas. And I don't remember if we're going to hear from Chairman Fletcher, but if he joins, we will welcome him with open arms. And we also have someone here today who is also really incredibly important to this in this discussion, someone who I've known for a long time, and his name is Mayor Todd Gloria, and he is going to present some thoughts around, again, this discussion on infrastructure. And you heard it in the opening. Infrastructure is so important in our daily lives, and the infrastructure bill itself presents an opportunity because it's not about how we get from point A to point B safely, on roads that are not filled with potholes and that allow us to drive silently. It's about mass transit. It's about airports. It's about pipes. For those of us in the San Diego region, we know pipes. Our infrastructure is old and outdated, and this is a real opportunity to make changes that will reduce the pipeline breaks and will reduce the impacts that we see from the aging infrastructure. But again, I'm excited about this conversation. More importantly, what I will tell you up front is I want your questions. We're really going to try and drive this conversation towards solutions that we can all think about if they happen, and we can think about the impact and how important they will be in our community, in our region. And so I want to stay cognizant of the agenda. First up, who we have speaking to us about this opportunity and from the state level is the Honorable Pro Tem Tony Atkins. And Tony, welcome to today's forum. And I now turn the floor over to you right on schedule.
Well, Mitch, thank you. And let me say thanks to the association for pulling all of us together. How great it is to see all of these local elected officials, people that you helped get elected to do the work. And we all have great relationships in terms of trying to work together. And I think, Mitch, you must have read my notes. I start off with saying this is a once in a generation opportunity to transform California's future because of the partnership of all of these levels of government. And, I don't have the wonderful gift of charismatic gab that I think Juan Vargas does. We all know him, silver tongue, great elected official. I tend to do this thing that my staff, their eyes glaze over and they're like, oh God, there she goes with the list of things we've gotten accomplished again, because I believe very much in that to-do list. But I wanted today, I'll go quickly because I didn't realize there were so many great elected officials here to answer your questions and to have the dialogue. So I'm really glad for the opportunity. So I'll try to go quickly. But one of the things I really wanted to talk about is that once in a generation opportunity, a decade of what I would call responsible budgeting combined with robust federal stimulus action. So let me thank our federal colleagues that allowed us to deliver more responsible and equitable state budget in modern history, despite the pandemic. And record investments in families and small businesses, education, libraries, healthcare. And in 2022, we're going to continue that momentum. We have an estimated $40 to $50 billion budget surplus. Now, I do need to point out that that $40 to $50 billion, about 48% of that goes directly because of Prop 98, all of you education folks here, to education. So roughly half of that is going to go directly to schools, hopefully into things like mental health, counselors, nurses, support structure for the kids that we know mean so much. But I also wanted to put this budget and actions at the state level through an equity lens. One of the things that we are talking about that we've noticed in the last few years really was an effort to talk about how resources should be put forward in a way that really serves the very people who need it the most. And so I'll go really quickly, and we can always get this to you in writing if you need it, the list. But in 21-22, our budget, we put about $8.1 billion in tax cuts for working class through the earned income tax credit. That's EITC funds distributed, about $63.5 million in San Diego County alone. I see the whole county as my responsibility as well as the state. So I'm not just going to focus on my district. EITC funds since 2015, $207 million. Put that with the federal earned income tax credit, and that's real money for families that they will put on the streets for their families, their kids, usually supporting small businesses. So it's a win for the individual, it's a win for the community, and it's a win for business. We sent out $600 stimulus checks for middle-class families, an additional $500 for families with children, and that's individuals making $75,000 and below. So that was the ceiling, and we were trying to get that up because we know that $75,000 doesn't go a long way in a high cost of living place like California and San Diego. Small businesses. $5 billion budgeted for grant opportunities, tax credits, and immediate relief. And I wanted to get this data because I think it's relevant to you, and I think it's what you want to know from us. 61, and there's more dialogue in Sacramento about how this money gets distributed. 61% of the funds went to low to moderate income small businesses. 46% were women-owned. 61% were minority-owned, specifically Black-owned businesses, 7.3. And we got to continue to focus on that and hold government accountable so we're helping the very folks who need it the most. We've heard these dialogues for years about how small businesses and particularly minority-owned businesses are not supported the same way. They're left out of the procurement process altogether. We got to work on that. Rental relief, $2.2 billion allocated for rental and utility assistance. Statewide statistics, Black or African-American, 21%. If you look at the gender breakdown, female 56%, male 44%. The income levels really started at the lowest, 30% of average median income. So that's 64% of that money went to the 30% of area median income. And that's a family of four making only $36,350 a year. Think about that. You know these folks. We know these neighbors. We know who this impacts. About 22% went to the 50% level, 6% to the 60%, and 7% of that money went to the 80% of AMI, which is about $90,000 for a family of four. So we're trying to get to those most in need. In the city statistics, about 38,352 applications were submitted at the city level. About 20% went to assist Black households, different percentage for of color, which isn't just African American. Homelessness, $12 billion for the state, about 100 million over 2 years to San Diego. We're going to look at more of that. When we talk about education, we are finally putting more towards education than the state of California ever has. We're about 21,152 per pupil in San Diego. That should be a ceiling. I mean, a floor, not a ceiling. We know that our educational needs are pretty serious. When it gets to some of those infrastructure dollars, we've put $3.7 billion to combat sea level. And we know that those communities most impacted for sea level rise are some of the hardest hit and most vulnerable communities. About 1.5 billion for wildfire, 5 billion for water drought resilience. It includes about 1.2 billion over 2 years for programs to increase forest thinning, build fuel breaks, help homeowners and fire-prone communities retrofit structures. We also know that areas around San Diego River and Choyas Creek are in need of attention. That impacts our communities directly. We're putting money there. Broadband, $6 billion. Thank you to the federal government. And the state added more to that to expand fiber infrastructure. Now we got to stay focused on that because we got to make sure it's going to be done the right way so that it impacts urban communities and rural. Both have broadband issues, and we know that. San Diego, something that makes Todd Gloria very happy. $50 million to fund our region's pure water project to make us more water sustainable in our community. UCSD Hospital, $30 million to invest in phase 1 development. UCSD serves as our county hospital. So we need to make sure that infrastructure is there for communities south of Interstate 8. Also, one of the things I'm most proud of is $35 million to renovate our historic theater, ECC Theater. That's the theater where we first, Coretta Scott King gave her impassioned speech on MLK, the federal holiday when that was enacted. That infrastructure matters. Our community college system is one of the most robust in the state of California. For 2022, I'm almost getting through this. The Senate's budget priority is really going to continue to be to put our
Recording in
wealth.
progress.
I just got told I was being recorded. We want to put the wealth to work for those who need it the most, and that's middle-class families and those still struggling to get by. Our initial budget proposal is in line with that goal. We are looking at the governor's proposal right now. In the coming months, we're going to be working with him to enact a lot of things. Our priorities are going to be improving public health, mental health access, and affordability. We've got to work to address staffing issues in all of these areas, workforce development, healthcare, expansion for healthcare for our most vulnerable. You've seen us expand Medi-Cal to all California residents, regardless of immigration status. It's taken us a while to do that. We expect that we're going to be able to cover an additional 700,000 more people by 2024. COVID response, an additional $2.7 billion. Targeting our hardest hit communities. That's going to be increased testing, expansion of clinic hours and capacity, boosting staffing at vaccination sites, trying to support our workers. Housing, I heard housing being mentioned as I was signing on. Legislation this year is going to be for a first-time homebuyer program, a collaborative between the state and private investors. And what we really want to do is to try to reach those communities that need to create intergenerational wealth, to change that lens through which we view typical home ownership. There's also going to be about 500 million one-time funds with intent to provide another 750 million for housing projects. We are going to be supporting our community colleges, CSUs and UCs to build housing for students. Think about what that might mean for the community colleges. And our own community college here is way ahead of the game. They are looking at it and they are going after money. Homelessness, an issue more visible than ever. One of our biggest focuses, and I think you'll hear our mayor talk about this, is a focus on services and shelter. But we've got to get social workers and the services to support it. We have a lack of a workforce issue to deal with. Now that we've got all this money to work on housing, we got to have the infrastructure to support the housing unit for those who are homeless, may have mental health issues, drug addiction, all of those things. A couple of things I want to highlight real quick. Maternity care. Nancy Skinner, Senator, did SB 65 last year. That's California's Momnibus bill. It was an act signed in October, 1 month before President Biden signed his administration's first Momnibus bill. And that is going to aim to close the existing racial gaps in maternal and infant mortality rates. It codifies and strengthens work around pregnancy-associated mortality. We have a review committee, which is going to investigate pregnancy-related deaths and make recommendations. It's going to improve data collection. It's going to support midwifery and the workforce around that. So there's a lot going on. California Prenatal Equity Initiative, we're going to be looking at that, particularly for communities of color. I'll end with a couple of things around civil rights. A few years ago, it took obviously a crisis to push legislative action around issues like use of force. Secretary of State Dr. Weber got that done several years ago when she was in the Assembly. This year we got SB 2 done with my colleague Senator Bradford, the Kenneth Roth Jr. Police Decertification Act. It took tragedies, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, too many people for society to start to look at the culture and that it really is producing devastating effects. And so we got the bill done last year. This year, I'm really excited to say, as we look at the accountability around what SB 2 will do in police decertification, the governor proposed in his budget $22.7 million in 2022, and then ongoing $20 million to support the implementation of that bill. And let me tell you, the post body at the state that looks at training, I was honored as a Senate President Pro Tem to appoint, some of you may remember Lamont Ewell, who served as our city manager a number of years ago. Lamont is on that board and advises me, someone who oversaw police departments and fire departments and city services. So there's the reparations task force proposed by Dr. Weber, enacted by the governor, AB 3121. As the pro tem, I was able to appoint City Council President Pro Tem Monica Montgomery to that. And you've seen some of the articles coming forward about how we look at reparations, voting rights. Obviously, Dr. Weber, Shirley Weber, sorry, now that there's Doctors Weber, I need to differentiate. But Shirley Weber has led the way in terms of trying to expand voting rights in California. So while the rest of the country is taking a wrong turn, in this state, we are setting the trend thanks to the leadership of people we know right here from our very own community. Education, we're trying to make sure that we curb the debt, increase enrollment, but deal with student success and provide more services for communities of color. On climate, we're doing a lot of work. I could spend a whole session on that, but I think I've taken more time than I need to. I'm happy to answer any questions during the discussion. I'm going to stay on and hear what my colleagues have to say. I will tell you the highlight of my my year in the midst of this pandemic that we all want to be done with is I got to go visit Vice President Kamala Harris in December. And it was quite a to-do to get into the Capitol. I know people like Juan Vargas and Sarah Jacobs and Scott Peters, they wander right on into the White House, I'm sure. But I had to go through this whole rigmarole, and it's vice president, vice president, vice president. All of a sudden, I'm right there with the vice president, and I'm like, Madam Vice President. And she looked at me and she tipped her head and she said, Kamala. And she leaned in to hug me, and I said, oh no, ma'am, forever you will be Madam Vice President. So it was one of those moments I wanted to share because she's a California girl. She is in one of the highest leadership positions in the world. And we have someone there, in addition to our federal delegation, who's looking out for us from California. And so anyway, I'll stop there. Mitch, thank you for giving me all that time. I went as quickly as I could to share as much as I could.
Madam Pro Tem, it is always a pleasure to listen to you. And I think what everybody needs to realize is everything that she talked about is important to note. We are really going through a moment in this state, in this nation, where we're faced with a pandemic and the challenges of the pandemic. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel as we get through the pandemic and we start to rebuild communities. What you heard the Pro Tem talk about as far as the investment in California, I want to make mention of a couple of things that are important because I know the mayor will talk about it. The housing assistance, she talked about that. The federal dollars that came to San Diego to help people who were behind on their rent, who were behind on their utilities, was so important. And we've been the model here in San Diego. I heard the statistic, Madam Pro Tem, that only 15% of the money that provided by the federal government had been allocated. But here in San Diego, we've allocated every dollar that they have sent to us. And I'm really proud of the Housing Commission and what's happening with the county board on that, because it is so important. And I also want to mention that you talked about the word equity. I think what everybody's going to be listening for today in this discussion is we've talked about equity, and now we're looking for the actions that emphasize that equity is still the focus. Equity is not supposed to be momentarily, for part of the moment. It's now supposed to be part of the fabric. And I think that what we get with you, and I have always known this about you, is you do look at every community and what the needs are. And you've always had equity as a focus. And now with this tremendous opportunity in front of us, we really have a chance to address problems. So I looked at some of the questions in the chat that came up, and I'll just ask you a couple that before we go to the Caltrans director. And that is, one of them is on broadband. And we heard in the last forum, Congresswoman Jacobs mentioned that there was money in the CARES Act for broadband, and we talked about how we get access to it. One of the things San Diego and the region learned during the pandemic is that little thing we thought maybe had gone away, the digital divide, was alive and well, and was more of a negative than ever envisioned, as we found out that online learning from home was not a reality and a possibility for a lot of families. So there's a question about broadband and the focus of the state with its federal dollars and the money coming to California and how we can really improve broadband and equalize access. And then there's another question around the transportation. And I know that mass transit transportation enhancements, the infrastructure package puts money in for Amtrak as well as light rail, and the congressional delegation members that are listening. With this money for Amtrak, what I found interesting is the $66 billion. Hopefully there will be an Amtrak station in National City as part of this package, so that people in South Bay can get to Amtrak and get up and down the coast to LA or to the airport, because that is something we've talked about for a long time. So Madam Pro Tem, can you talk a little bit about broadband and the focus, and also about transportation and what your hopes are?
Sure. And I was just trying to figure out how to respond to Christina. So thank you in the chat. And also on the small business data, someone else asked a question about that, Shalala. We can get you those specific numbers directly. Please don't hesitate to call our office. And I see that Pam answered and said we can get you those numbers. We're going to continue to monitor the data breakdown on the small businesses who are getting the dollars. And there's more applications coming forward. I don't think that's me.
That's not,
there's more money coming forward through GoBiz for small businesses. Please stay connected to our office. We put out notices so that small businesses will access those applications. And my office is always available, Jason, Pam in the office, to walk you through how to get those applications. And we want to give you the numbers because we're monitoring it. On the broadband, we still have a working group out of the Senate that is going to be looking at what those in the industry call the middle mile, the last mile. That gets to be the conversation about how do you get that connection directly to the communities. And so we are going to be monitoring that ongoing, because we had a lot of nervousness about just giving carte blanche open checkbook of $6 billion. And are we really going to get what we want out of that, which is whether you're rural or urban, if you don't have access, and also assistance, some public subsidies and assistance for lifeline types of services are all really important. So it sounds like I probably need to get updates out. You're going to hear hearings at the legislature on where we stand with broadband, and it will probably happen during some of our budget discussions. And I will tell you, we are participating remotely. So you don't have to be in Sacramento. You can listen online and give a call to us on these issues. If you have questions, please call my office. But we're going to continue to focus on the middle mile, the end mile, and what's it really going to translate into, what the cost is going to be to you to have access.
Wonderful.
Transportation, a lot going on transportation. Obviously, I'm working really hard to get money for the existing problem we have with our coaster and the line, the second busiest rail line in the country, and the federal partners are part of that discussion with us here at the state as well. We are going to have to really push. I'm going to tell you this, as San Diego, I will tell you, San Francisco, Los Angeles, they forget that San Diego is the second largest city. We're a huge county, and they think they'll give us $250 million and we'll be fine trying to deal with the coaster. Not nearly enough. We've got work to do. And I will tell you, Scott Peters has really taken the state to task on this high-speed rail, because San Diego has sort of been the tail end on that one. Yes. And so we're going to be looking at that. But in terms of active transportation, we really do have more work to do here, particularly as it relates to housing. So I hope we can have a broader discussion on transportation. Any of these topics could have been one-time topics where we go into the weeds. When
Absolutely.
you're ready to go into the weeds, call me back and I'll be there with Deanna and my team to get into the weeds and answer as many questions. In the meantime, please don't hesitate to call my office.
Perfect.
We'll
One more
get you
question.
in.
One more question for you, and it's tied to jobs. And I will remind everybody, she said something very important on transportation. San Diego to LA is the second busiest corridor in the country, behind, I think it's Boston to New York. And therefore, we hope that we get the attention on transportation, especially on the rail system. But Madam Pro Tem, talk a little bit about the jobs piece. That what the infrastructure package presented was an opportunity for high quality, wonderful long-term jobs as we rebuild our communities. And you mentioned two components, and can you just talk briefly about them? One is the businesses and small businesses and companies that can get an opportunity to get contracts for some of these projects. And then, because that's its own set of jobs, and then ultimately the jobs that'll happen, for the general community who says, I want to go work on the infrastructure projects and the rebuilding of these. Talk a little bit about what your hope is out of this in the end.
Well, I will tell you, I do think it's born out of tragedy that all of a sudden, thanks to Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement, fatal, deaths, that there has become a renewed focus on looking at how these things are not translating into grants for small businesses, particularly businesses of color, women-owned businesses, etc., and procurement. That's a word nobody really talks about. It's dull. It's boring. What does it mean?
But it's so important.
Dr. Weber sat on the EEOC board. George Stevens from the dais yelled about it for decades. Juan remembers, and we're still doing it at the state. Steve Bradford does it all the time. But I think we've started to focus on this, and we've started to ask, and it is the data. How many businesses? Who are those businesses? And you got to do it at the local level, the state level. And I will tell you, the feds have pushed, in terms of the administration's money coming to the state, job creation, good job creation. So we're looking at all of those components. And we've got so many workforce issues we're going to have to tackle because we don't have the workers that we need. And as we train those workers, there will be jobs available because of all of this money that's being put out around infrastructure.
Well, Madam Pro Tem, I want to just say on behalf of the entire BAPAC family, we appreciate you because we know that you care and that you're focused on the right issues that will indeed impact the community. And as I move on to the next speaker, I want to say something that I want to remind the congressional delegation on the jobs piece. There, Prop 16 became a distraction. We had a forum on it. Prop 16 was always for our community about the opportunities to have contracts with the state. That is a gigantic budget opportunity. It got lost on this discussion around college entrance. But one of the things I think we are all excited to hear from the congressional delegation, it is our understanding that there is language in federal law that says if you're using federal dollars, you do indeed have to have that equity lens on when allocating projects and funding, and that is a benefit for the community. So, Madam Pro Tem, once again, thank you. I know you're going to stay on and listen. We're going to go now to someone who's going to have a big role in improving the infrastructure that we use to move from point A to point B, and that is Caltrans. And I think we actually have the director of Caltrans on with us. Talks, are you on?
I am.
Wonderful. Talks, welcome. Talks is the director of Caltrans, and is the focus is the San Diego region. Talk a little bit about what you're expecting with this passage of this incredible package, and when will we start to see it make a difference, and what are your hopes?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'll be very brief because a lot's been covered already. I'll try to be brief at least. But let me start off by saying kudos to you and kudos to BAPAC for organizing this. This is absolutely necessary, needs to be done, and not just this one time. It needs to be done more often, probably quarterly or something. I would recommend that to keep tabs on what's about to happen. And I want to thank the Speaker Pro Tem as well for taking the time to be a part of a discussion such as this. She did a good job. You would think she's a transportation and infrastructure professional the way she was going through that list. But as far as my hopes, you talked about it well already. And by the way, I'm sitting in a car at my son's soccer game to take a break to do this call. Hence why I'm on my phone and not on video.
We appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. So this is unprecedented. You touched on this very well already. Since 1956, America has never dedicated this kind of money ever to infrastructure. Unbelievable. And not only is the money available, the policy alignment is there as well about where we want to go. So over $1 trillion, $1.2 trillion. And by the way, there's a section in that $1.2 trillion that says at least 10% of that money needs to go to DBEs and small businesses, et cetera. So over $100 billion across the country needs to go to minority and underserved groups across the country. But what does it mean directly to California as far as overall? I talked about how unprecedented it is. Over 5 years before, we were getting roughly 19 billion for transportation. Now we're going to be getting 25 billion for highway transportation. For transit, we were getting roughly 8.1 billion. Now we're going to be getting 9.5 billion. And the list goes on and on and on like that. All of our money across the board has gone up. And not only federally, kudos to my boss, Governor Newsom. His package, Speaker Pro Tem Atkins touched on this just a little bit. His package proposal of $9.1 billion for transportation also is a significant increase than we've ever had in the history of the state from the general fund. So this is not gas tax money. The governor is proposing to pass through the speaker, her assembly, and the other chamber, an increase of $9.1 billion for transportation. So Caltrans's budget this coming fiscal year potentially will be the largest it's ever been in its history. Over $20 billion will be Caltrans's budget in this upcoming fiscal year potentially. So a lot is there. I'll close it then. I want to hear more specific questions if you have some, but excited about this opportunity to lead in the needs that will be moving forward for infrastructure for the state and for the San Diego region specifically moving forward.
Well, I want to thank you for that, and again, appreciate you being here. Know that what the delicate balance of trying to watch your child play soccer and provide this information. So thank you for being here. And I think what I'll say in this is that there is a great collaboration that happens between the cities in the region and Caltrans. And Madam Pro Tem, again, I think what he mentioned that the $20 billion budget, what everybody's going to be looking for is truly the improvements in the road infrastructure that enhance safety, but also just address the basic needs of wear and tear. And we've heard so much about the declining gas tax, but it will be really interesting to see the coordination between the local Caltrans district office and the cities to address some of those needs. So thank you very much for your comments. I know that we are on a tight timeline, so there may be other questions that come up for Caltrans, but we're going to move to the congressional delegation. And I know I saw in the note that Congressman Peters has a tight window, and he is going to speak first out of the congressional delegation because I think and then we'll hear from them. And I guess what I would say for the congressional delegation first is you did your job. You got it through the Congress. It wasn't easy. It's now coming home to California, and it's hopefully coming to communities, here in San Diego County and being impactful. Talk a little bit about what your hopes are for this, because you made a lot of commitments to get this passed and into the hands of the states and the communities. So we'll start with you, Congressman Peters. Welcome to the forum today.
Thanks, Mitch. I'm actually calling you from Lubbock, Texas. I'm visiting energy facilities out at Texas Tech. So I appreciate you accommodating me. I'm going to be on for a little minute, and then I think my colleagues are going to cover some of the questions, if that's okay. But I am so excited about this bill. When I first came to Congress, I was talking to a friend of mine on the Transportation Committee, and she says, "Scott, we're going to do $1 trillion infrastructure bill." And I said, "There's no way you're going to do that. If you could get $200 billion for highways, that would be a huge win." But we came to this point now where we're going to put $1.2 trillion into infrastructure, and obviously not just roads and bridges, although the biggest advocates for electric vehicles have to understand that they drive on roads and bridges. So that's not anti-climate. But we're talking about the largest infrastructure investment in the history of the United States. Was passed in November, signed into to law by President Biden at a White House ceremony that I personally attended with some of my colleagues. I think the other folks on the call were here. Let's start out with repairing.
We're going to mute everybody, I think.
I'm guessing Jordan Marks has a kid.
Okay.
Nice to see you guys. Today we're so start with repair roads and bridges with a focus on climate change and making neighborhoods safer. We're reauthorizing surface transportation for 5 years, which allows long-term planning for community impact. We're going to invest $110 billion in additional funding for road and bridge repair. We're going to support transformational projects that redevelop neighborhoods which were previously ignored and often divided, and $5 billion for Safe Streets and Roads for All program to reduce traffic fatalities. This will mesh up nicely with what Mayor Gloria is doing in his Sexy Streets initiative, which is a big investment, I think, with a focus on equity, recognizing that a lot of communities, some streets aren't even paved at all. Next, we're going to improve transportation options with $89.9 billion in public transit investments over the next 5 years. This is the largest investment in public transportation ever in the United States. There's $39 billion specifically to modernize fleets by expanding the use of zero-emission vehicles, improve access for seniors and people with disabilities. We're going to tackle America's legacy of pollution in many Black and brown majority neighborhoods, $21 billion for cleanup of Superfund and brownfield sites, reclaiming abandoned mines and capping orphan wells. 26% of Black Americans and 29% of Hispanic Americans live within 3 miles of a Superfund site. That's not directly applicable to San Diego, fortunately. We're fortunate not to have that program generally to those problems to dig out of, but it is an equity issue across the country. It's going to be addressed by the Biden administration and by Congress. I think one of the most important part of this bill is what we're doing with broadband. I think some people have mentioned that already, but $65 billion to close the digital divide. We used to talk when I came into Congress about rural broadband. There was a recognition by everyone that rural communities were underserved and that broadband was not just the connection to information, but the connection to opportunity. I mean, imagine the entrepreneurship that can happen from anywhere if you have good access to broadband. But we also learned in the pandemic that it wasn't that digital divide wasn't limited to rural areas, that there are many areas that were part of otherwise affluent cities, urban areas like San Diego, that suffered from the digital divide. So this money will also provide to close the divide, even in those otherwise tech-savvy areas, even including San Diego. We're going to establish a new affordable connectivity program to provide working families financial assistance, $30 a month for households, and a $100 one-time discount for the purchase of a laptop or a tablet or desktop computer. We're going to be delivering clean water to Americans. I was able to visit Flint with my colleague, Dan Kildee. Elijah Cummins came back then before he passed away. We saw Flint, lead is one of the most pernicious contaminants because the damage it does is permanent. It does it to children, and we need to change out those pipes. And that happens in a lot of communities that can't on their own afford to do that. So the federal government has got to provide money. In this bill, $55 billion for households, businesses, schools, childcare centers to eliminate lead service pipes. 10 million Americans lack access to safe drinking water, and 400,000 schools, some are here in San Diego, lack access to safe drinking water. And I think that's a huge equity issue. I think, like I said, when we saw lead contamination in San Diego, it was the areas that hadn't painted out, had old construction. And that was a real equity issue here. That's the same nationally as well. Most projects won't begin until the summer. This will take some time to deploy. Much of the money will ultimately be distributed by state agencies. So that's why Tox and Tony are important in this. And I will call her Tony, even though she deserves as much respect as the Vice President of the United States for the level she's achieved. She's running the state. But federal agencies are working to grow and modify existing programs. But what I want to say to BAPAC and to everyone is that this is your chance to have a say. So you want to let the Department of Transportation, the FCC, the Department of Education, and others know where you think the money needs to go. You also ought to tell Tony and your representatives at the state and assembly and the Senate. You ought to let Todd Gloria, the mayor, know or the cities that you're in. And certainly contact our office with comments or for more information if you wish. I really appreciate BAPAC doing this forum. I think it's tremendously useful. This is a huge opportunity for all of us, a historic investment in infrastructure. We used to talk about that under the previous president. It got to be a joke, Infrastructure Week. We did the Infrastructure Week to beat all infrastructure weeks, and it's going to help everyone with jobs and with equity, and I'm looking forward to implement it. So I'm going to leave the questions to my colleagues, Juan and Sarah and Mike Levin, who's not with us today. All deserve a big pat on the back for voting for this. It's an honor to do this with you all. And Jason Berkovich from my staff will be on here if there's any questions.
Congressman Peters, thank you very much for that. And again, I think what you've said it, and Madam Pro Tem, again, once in a generation opportunity, and how we make this work for us in our community is so important. So I want to thank you, Congressman Vargas and Congressman Jacobs. We're gonna pitch you on a couple of questions that I think people want to hear your answers on, and then you can tie in what you're really excited about. But one of the things I'll start with is just put out on the table, and you can decide who wants to go first. Congressman Vargas, you and I, met when you were District 8 representative at City Hall, and one of the reports that came out last year was disturbing, and it talked about the fact that District 8 and District 4 had 10 and 12 unpaved miles of unpaved roads, respectively. And it was appalling to a lot of us because it's something that we've talked a lot about for years, and yet it was never addressed and fixed, while the other districts average somewhere between 1 and 3. It is wonderful because Mayor Gloria has said sexy streets is a priority, wants to address this because this is an equity issue. Talk about this, the money for roads and road repair and what that means from your previous experience and why it's so important. And then talk about what you really love. And then Congressman Jacobs, the last time we had this forum, you were excited about the technology aspects and the broadband money. We talked about the digital divide for so long. Is this really the opportunity? And you heard Madam Pro Tem talk about this. It's not just about rural districts. What we found is that in the urban core, you have connectivity problems. And what are you excited about that we really can overcome and achieve great things with this money? And this will take a partnership between the region, the city, and the congressional delegation in the state. So who wants to go first? Again, thank you for being here. I'll let you pick, or I'll pick for you. Which one?
Age before beauty. You can go, Juan.
Well, it's an excellent point. Thank you very much. As you can see, Sarah and I get along well. She's a wonderful, wonderful new addition to our congressional delegation here. She really is. Well, what an honor again to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Mitch, any day I get to see you is a real pleasure. Wow, I haven't seen you. And we've been friends for a long, long time. And Ellen Nash, thank you for putting this on. Everybody at BAPAC, thank you. I'm very excited, obviously, about this program, this package, this infrastructure. However, I'm also very nervous, just to be frank. And I'll just speak frankly here. Mitch, you said, you brought up Prop 16. What you didn't bring up was Prop 209.
Yep.
Back when I first was on the San Diego City Council, what we used to do, George Stephen and myself, we used to look at the contracts. And we would take a look because we had quotas when I first got on there. We just take a look. And if they didn't match up, if they did not hit the quotas that were necessary and our goals, we simply wouldn't vote for those contracts. We wouldn't. That was it. And we got sued by the Associated General Contractors a number of times because they were saying that this was illegal. And we thought that they were legal and we thought we could do it. And at one point it didn't matter because Proposition 209 passed. And then because of them, the state deciding in a fairly close vote to get away with do away with affirmative action, we couldn't do this anymore. So then we tried to put in goals in there, and it worked sometimes and sometimes it didn't. I remember so vividly, a good thing with money was that we were building a new school, and we were building a new school in George Stevens district. However, there wasn't one person that was working on that rebuild of that school, not one person who was African American. There was not one contract, small, large, or any contract for an African American in that school rebuild, even though it was for millions and millions and millions of dollars. George went and jumped on the tractor, literally, and stopped the work. I supported him very, very strongly from the city council, even though it wasn't, our business, it was really school board. He was absolutely right. There's no equity in that. How can that be that you're rebuilding a school in an area that was predominantly African American, and you didn't have one Black person working on that project, and you didn't have any company owned by African American Black, none of them. That was absolutely outrageous. That being said, it concerns me right now that we're going to be spending so much money all over the country, and including in California. We still do have the overlay of Prop 209. Most of the money will come through the state. So unfortunately, there will be then this entanglement and conflict of laws. So if the federal government is spending the money and there's no money from the state, we can in fact do affirmative action. It's still legal for us to do it. Once the state gets involved, my understanding there's a conflict of laws, and so there it becomes very difficult for the state to do it. That's why we have to insist that there has to be equity, that there has to be not only small business owners, but also people of color, African Americans, Latino business owners, and people on these projects. We have to have equity. We have to have this thing be fair. If not, it's going to be infrastructure, which is great, just like that school was great. But if it doesn't help the community in a holistic way, it's not good. It's a setback again. And that's why I'm so appreciative of what BAPAC's, I think, attempting to do here, saying, everybody, wake up. There's a bunch of money coming to San Diego, to California, and it's coming in a good way because it's for infrastructure. We're all in favor of it, just like that school. We're all in favor. I've always in favor of raising, of money for the schools. I think it's a good thing, but let's make sure the money is spent equitably. Make sure that, in fact, we can help families. That's why, I think that our pro tem, and man, am I proud of her. She said it absolutely right. She wants to create that generational wealth. And a whole bunch of things are impacted by that. Homes too, obviously. The ability for African Americans, Latinos, people that are poor to buy homes, because that's the way you build up equity and you build up opportunities in our country, in our community. And so I think all these things are so important, but let's keep our eyes on the ball on this thing and push for this. Again, there are opportunities within the law, within Proposition 209, to make sure that there is no discrimination. I wish that we had, I'm still in favor of quotas. I was in favor of quotas back then. I'm in favor of quotas now. I'm in favor of goals. Again, because of Prop 209, it becomes very difficult. But anyway, I throw that out there because, when we talk about money for highways, and I could go down this whole list. My staff, Stormy, was very good about giving the list of all the money coming to San Diego. But the most important thing I want to say is, I hope we keep our eye on the ball and make sure that it's done equitably, that it's done fair, to make sure that every community benefits from this. Because again, like the history that I've seen, it's great that we all pitched in and we all passed these bonds for the schools so they could rebuild a school. That's great. I'm all for it. We did it. Then when they're rebuilding the school, they don't even have one African American working on that construction. Not one small business owned by African Americans. There's an outrage. Let's make sure that doesn't happen here.
I agree.
Unless I do have one little story I got to tell. I don't want to up Tony Atkins, of course, because I love her. But I also went to the White House when I was a newbie, my first year. And so I get to the White House and I'm standing there with all the freshmen, just like Sarah. And we're meeting the new president. And the new president, of course, not new, it's the second term, but President Barack Obama. And so I think it was Dan Kildee went right before me, and I'm next. And I go up to say hello to the president. And the first thing he says is, "Paco, how are you?" And then we start talking about all these friends that we have in common. People didn't know that we went to school together. So Barack and I have been friends for a long time because we went to law school together. The funny part was, after that conversation, I said, "Mr. President," I said, "there's lots of people here. I should move along." And he goes, "Well, okay. We need to talk." And I said, "Absolutely. I'm always here for whatever you need." Afterwards, someone asked me, "Well, what was that all about?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Oh," I said, "Well, the president and I have been friends. Barack and I, he used to come over to our apartment when I first got married with my wife, and we had these little parties, and he would come over. He's a good friend. He's a wonderful really has always been a really wonderful guy. And he goes, no, no, no. He goes, why did he call you Taco? No, no, it's Paco, as you know, Mitch. My nickname is
I
Paco.
know.
But anyway,
That's
so I
a
have
great
little
story.
sermon.
That is a
But-
great story for those of us who've known you a long time. You know,
Is that why Salud still calls you Taco?
That is.
That is a great story. Great story. Great story. Well, with that, we will transition to Congresswoman Jacobs. You heard the Congressman's fears. Talk a little bit about, again, the topic and give us your thoughts.
Absolutely. And it's really great to have Juan there with me. We partner on fighting for so many of these issues. I'll just add to his answer a little bit that for the money that goes through the federal government, the Biden administration has said that they're prioritizing sending 40% of the investments to communities who haven't historically gotten that. And Ms. Ellen and I have had many conversations about this topic and making sure we're actually getting the funding to communities and getting the jobs to communities. And so I know that there are issues at the state level, but at least for the federal funding, we're going to be working very closely with the administration to make sure that that is happening and that they're upholding this commitment that they've made. The other thing that I'll say is we should remember when we're talking about this bill, as great, as important as this bipartisan infrastructure bill has been, I and Juan and many of us were thinking of it as one piece of a broader package. And frankly, the broader package was part of the pieces that fit in the equity piece on top of this bill. And so we're still working on getting those done, but I think we need to be clear that it's going to take a lot of extra pushing because some of the things we were counting on were going to be in the other bill to push this bill to be more equitable. And so when we're talking about workforce, for instance, the funding for workforce training, the funding for childcare, the funding for the things that would enable more people to be in the workforce and get these jobs is in the other bill that we haven't passed yet, right? So there's still a lot more work to do. This is a great bill and I'm really excited and I was really proud to be part of the group that actually helped get it across the finish line in the House and get it done and go to the signing at the White House that Scott mentioned. I also pressured the administration to make sure they were inviting some of our local folks so that, because we know that we need local and state government involved in the infrastructure process. But we also know that when a bill isn't as big as it needs to be to address the problem, and when there's scarcity, it's communities like this one that often get left behind in that scarcity. And so we have to be really vigilant to make sure that we are getting that funding where it needs to go. And I know Juan and I and Scott and the rest of our congressional delegation are working hard to do that. Mitch, you asked about broadband. So as I think Scott said quickly, there's $65 billion for high-speed internet. 15 billion of that is for affordability. 2 billion of that, though, is for digital equity. And then 40 billion is to help states reach those areas that don't have it. So California will probably get about 100 million of that. And it's estimated that 27% of Californians will be eligible for help paying for internet access through this bill. That's a really big deal. And we know from some of the pilot projects that we were working on during the pandemic, I was the co-chair of the Equitable Distance Learning Task Force for our county, that the subsidies are important and we need to make sure that they are easily accessible and that we're working with the companies themselves so that the service that people are getting is actually the service that they need. It's the right bandwidth that they need for the kinds of downloading they need to do, right? Oftentimes these affordable programs actually weren't enough bandwidth so the kids in Zoom school couldn't actually be on Zoom all day, right? That doesn't help anybody. So there's a lot of this implementation we'll have to do, and there was going to be, I don't mean to keep harping on this because I do think the bipartisan infrastructure bill is an important and good bill, but there was going to be more funding for broadband in the Build Back Better Act that was going to help plug some of these gaps.
Well, it is one of those things you just said something that was so important. Having the right speed. One of the things we've learned in the pandemic is that video can indeed be useful. They can be helpful. There are there are far-ranging implications for this that involve even college learning, and being able to get a degree using video, but you have to have access. And so I know that this has been a passion of yours, and I know there are a lot of us that want to work with you because we see this as a real opportunity. As someone who is sitting on the Housing Commission, I would love to have the right broadband connectivity in every project owned by the Housing Commission, but that's something we can talk about later. There's a question that you both can answer, that is around the jobs. You know, this package is going to create a number of opportunities. And there's a question bit about the training programs, and will we be able to really train people so they can actually get these jobs and be successful? Can you talk a little bit about what the conversation was around the training aspect and the employment aspect that was going to come as an attachment to this, and what your hopes are? And we'll start with you, Congressman Jacobs.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a provision in this bill that actually includes a requirement to diversify the transportation workforce, including through strategies like pre-apprenticeship programs and local hiring preferences. And then states also have flexibility to use the infrastructure funding for workforce training programs. So that is meant to help diversify the workforce, so that more people can benefit from these jobs. Truthfully, I'm concerned that if we don't get childcare in place, that no amount of workforce training is going to help address the fact that there are some structural reasons why many people can't access the labor market right now. But there are some provisions in this bill to help with that.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, what I would add, Mitch, to that is this, and this is very concerning, that there are provisions, of course, for apprenticeships and for local hiring. The local hiring is very important, because oftentimes what happens is these companies will go and hire somewhere else in Oklahoma, or they'll hire people in Arizona, and then they'll come here and they'll work on the project, and they'll stay in trailers, they'll stay in other places until they're finished, and then they go back. That really doesn't help, obviously, San Diego. It doesn't help our community when you have people from Arizona, they're just here to work on this project and then leave. People that are from Oklahoma. In fact, if you go to these job sites, often you'll see all the license plates, and the license plates are not California license plates. These trucks have license plates, people are working on them from Arizona, Oklahoma, other places where the salaries are not as high. So I just want to make sure that, and we have to be aggressive about this to make sure that there's local hire.
Sure.
Again, there's wording in there in these bills specifically for that. But if we're not aggressive about it, then it won't happen. That's why we have to be very vigilant. That's why I was very happy when I found out that we were going to have this meeting, because we have to keep our eye on the ball.
I agree. One last question while we have time, because we have a few more minutes left in your segment. This one is some of the questions in the chat that are really important. Right now, we are living through a time where inflation is really hurting families. I often remind my colleagues, my elected colleagues who are all friends, about the need to talk about the impact of inflation, cost of living issues, kitchen table conversations that people throughout the nation are having, and throughout the state in particular, where rents are going up, gasoline prices are going up, the cost of food is impacting. We are, as I remind my friends at the food bank, and that we have to prepare for what may be coming. Can you talk a little bit about why this has been such a difficult discussion in the Congress around poverty and the rise in poverty? And again, I know Build Back Better is not passing. What we hear in the media is that you don't have a complete agreement amongst the Democratic caucus about how to address it. Can you talk a little bit about why that's a problem? And is there a chance that we're really going to have a much more aggressive poverty focus from the Congress that moves some element of Build Back Better forward into passage?
I guess I can go first. Well, I really hope that we will be able to get something on the Build Back Better. I was bitterly disappointed when we didn't get Build Back Better passed. Bitterly disappointed. I've known, Kirsten Sinema for a long time, and we came in together, and was very disappointed that she wouldn't vote for that. Very disappointed. However, to be fair too, to some of the arguments that are made by some of my colleagues on the other side, Republicans, saying that we've juiced the system too much. In other words, that we've put too much money in the system, and because there is so much money, that's caused inflation. I don't particularly believe that. I do believe there's lots of problems associated with the pandemic. I mean, people forget we're in a pandemic. I mean, we had all sorts of problems, you know, with our supply chain. We've had all sorts of problems with people actually getting sick where they can't go to work, where you don't have the production that we normally had. So if you look at like lumber prices, lumber's way up. And why is that? You don't have a lot of people out there cutting down trees and producing them and processing them. So the prices are going to go up. A lot of the stuff that we see is because people didn't spend a lot of money. So they have a lot of money now. And now they're going out looking for stuff. And since they are, they're bringing the price up. Now, this is supposed to be a temporary inflation. However, some of these things we see they're not going to be temporary. They're going to be more long-term than temporary. And that is problematic. So you do have to adjust to make sure that you don't put too much money into the system. You know, some states right now are very happy because they have so much money, they don't know what to do with. And the reality is that's because the federal government gave them so much money that there's just an enormous amount of money sitting there. That's been very, very positive because we haven't fallen into a depression. I mean, inflation is bad and people are feeling it and it's real. Believe me, if we were in a depression, you would feel that too. And that would be very, very real. So I think we've done the right thing. But at the same time, I think we have to calculate to make sure we don't overjuice the system and then we create worse inflation. That being said, one of the things that is good about inflation, it does cause the rise of people's pay. In other words, you do have the increase then in people getting paid more because of inflation. You have a legitimate reason to go back and say, hey, I need to get paid more. I go to milk, I go to buy these things that are necessities. And you see, in fact, they do get paid more. So there is, you always want some inflation. I sit on the committee that looks at this. I'm on financial services. So I look at this every day and with Maxine Waters. And again, one of the things that you really have to look at too is housing in this whole thing, because that's such an important matter. And I'm glad someone brought up the issue of mortgages and forbearance and all these other things. That's going to be super important. We have to be very aggressive to make sure that people don't lose their houses like we did back in 2008. But all that being said, I think coming out of a pandemic, you will have inflation almost no matter what. Will it be transitory or will it be permanent? I think that's where you have to make sure you don't overspend, because if you do overspend, it won't be transitory, it will be permanent. And that's a real problem, because then wages will not keep up with that inflation and things are going to be more and more expensive and you won't be able to afford it.
Okay. Congresswoman Jeffries?
Yeah, so I will maybe slightly not disagree, but add on to something my colleague said, and Juan and I like to have these fun conversations. I actually think that we are not at risk of adding too much money into the economy. I think what matters is what you're spending that money on, because even the $3.5 trillion version of Build Back Better, almost every major economist said it would be deflationary. Why would it be deflationary? Because it would bring down the costs of the big ticket items that are actually what the American people are feeling as inflation. So it had money for housing, it had money for childcare and workforce training to alleviate the labor shortages that we're seeing. It had all these kinds of healthcare provisions that would bring down the cost of healthcare. Because when we're talking about inflation, I think the media likes to focus on the price of milk and these sort of basic consumer goods. And undoubtedly people are seeing that and they're being impacted by it. And, you know, most American families, even $1 more that they have to pay in food really makes a difference. But the actual reason why we're seeing the inflation number so high is because of housing. It's because of healthcare. It's because of these big ticket items. And we're not going to address that by trying to tinker at the margins of this basic consumer goods that people are feeling. And so I think it's important to recognize that, and to recognize that it is actually some structural change we're going to need to do to make sure that this is transitory and that will cost money. I think the other, you know, Mitch, you asked about poverty. I'm very grateful that the Speaker Pelosi appointed me as the only freshman on the newly created Select Committee on Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth. Mm-hmm. And what this committee is looking at is this very question. How do we make sure that we are building an economy that actually is helping everyone, and that we're addressing the things that have caused this huge disparity that we're seeing, both retroactively and as we're putting in place some of the rules of the road for the future economic system. And so just this past week, we actually had a hearing with many scholars and activists around how income inequality, how wealth inequality disparately impacts communities of color. I don't need to tell you all the numbers, you know them, you live it, you know it. But what we're looking at is what are some of the programs we can put in place to help mitigate that. One of the things we looked at in this select committee hearing was baby bonds, which are funds that any child born, they get access to it when they turn 18, usually to buy a home or pay for school or start a business. Just doing that would help cut in half the racial wealth gap. Because we know that young people's wealth inequality is one of the biggest contributing factors to that. We looked at guaranteed income pilots, which we're having a pilot here in San Diego, which I know many of you know about and are part of helping to design. And look, another part of it is that we know that we need to fix the supply chains. Part of that is this labor force participation, which I talked about, which we need childcare, we need workforce training, we need all of these things. But we are also working on a direct supply chain bill. The Senate calls it the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. We have a couple different bills in the House that comprise our version of it. Juan and I worked together on the foreign policy piece of the House one, the Eagle Act. But basically, it's going to look at how we can invest in some of these supply chains so that we are bringing those jobs here to the United States and we can have a more robust supply chain when we have crises like these. And we should be getting that done. The Senate already passed their version, so that's how I know we'll actually get something done.
So
I actually agree. If I could just say, I actually agree with everything that Sarah said, including the 3.5. I was actually in favor of the 3.5.
I know you were.
In fact, I was in favor of the $6 trillion. 3.5.
Me too, Juan.
Yeah, 3.5 trillion is just 1% of our GDP, because remember, it was over 10 years.
Sure.
The 6 trillion would be less than 2%, and it would be, I think, a real opportunity. Remember, inflation's running at 6 or 7%. So it's not the money that we're putting in. I was totally in favor of that. So I agree with what Sarah has said. I think she's right on.
You know, we still have a little bit of time before. I think we're waiting for Supervisor Vargas to join, but I want to delve into something because this conversation is always good for the residents of the community to hear from you. And often what we get, I think what I hear from people, the frustration is you watch the Sunday morning talk shows about what's happening in DC, and Madam Pro Tem, she and I and Congressman Vargas, we were rolling around City Hall in the 90s together, and I think what's interesting is the frustration these days now more is around do they really understand poverty and the impact? Congressman Jacobs, you said it's not about necessarily milk or the consumer goods, it's about the bigger things. You're right, housing. I don't know if Madam Pro Tem is within earshot, but she has been diligently focused on housing, and we have the conversation. We're not necessarily, we haven't given up, but it's a harder thing to do. Rents, mortgages, big chunk of income, but because they're such large chunks, they impact your ability on those consumer goods, and they impact your ability to live life. Do you find? I guess I have to ask you about this question. Do you get frustrated at times at the conversation in Washington, D.C.? And is part of the frustration driven by the fact that California is a high cost of living state, and some of your colleagues are in states where you can still buy a home for $80,000 or $100,000. You can still rent a place for $400 a month. Is that what creates the backlog sometimes in Washington, D.C.? Because again, you're passing big once in a generation packages, but this basic element of the struggle of households still plagues the conversation about, are they there for us or are they ignoring us? And, at some point, we've always talked about, Ellen and I always come up with these ideas, love to have a Friday afternoon, kitchen table conversation collaborative, where we talk about the real issues that are affecting people, because, not everybody is, you're right. The pandemic has been hard on people. And Congressman Vargas, I agree with you, put a lot of money in the system. I worry about inflation because I think what they've all said is the only way to get out of inflation is a deep recession. And so as we talk about housing and the impact of housing, Madam Pro Tem, you've worked on housing, and that is a big part of our problem in California. Do you all feel like, again, the conversation on poverty is unequal? And Madam Pro Tem, on housing, what do you think do you think we're really going to make in the next 5 years? Can we do something that is monumental that addresses that big component in poverty in California? And Madam Pro Tem, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you. I just got back. I had to go pick up the dogs from the groomers. So I'm a little behind
No problem.
on the discussion, but I do think we can. I mean, we continue to put money towards housing. We continue to look for different ways to provide production, but we got to put the money along with it for services for the homeless population. But for poverty, I was thinking as I went to pick up the dogs about what Representative Jacobs is advocating, which is childcare. We are going to continue to put money towards all kinds of services. When I say putting wealth to work for Californians, it's what the Senate caucus is pushing. It's going to be more earned income tax credits. It's going to be more focused for small business. It's going to be more focused for healthcare, for childcare, for expanding the workforce for childcare. Those are the things my caucus is interested in doing. And if we continue, I've missed a lot of the discussion, but knowing the focus of the mayor, knowing the focus of the county board of supervisors, knowing the money that the feds have brought to bear that the state is using, never before have we had this integrated approach to all these different issues, which, I think will make a difference. And it's really to all of the people on this call that are pushing for it and for us to look at it in that way. So I think we will make a difference in the next 2 to 4 years.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to end with this and then move to Supervisor Vargas. Congressman Jacobs and Congressman Vargas, again, on the issue of poverty, short answers. Is the difficulty at times because the states are also different and they don't understand how much pain, how the level of poverty really is impacting California? And it's a good, healthy debate, but it's different in every state. Is that an issue, or is it just we just can't reach consensus?
Well, I have a few things I want to add here. First, Mitch, you had mentioned that you think the only way to end the inflationary curve is to have a recession. That's not the understanding of most of the economists that I've spoken to.
Okay.
In fact, many of the things, like every major economist said that the Build Back Better Act would be deflationary because there's actually a lot of bottlenecks that we can address by public policy without having to lessen the economy. And in fact, one of the things we've seen from this is that most economists no longer believe that there is a one-to-one relationship between unemployment and inflation, which had been the basic economic theory that many of them were working off of, which I think gives us a real opportunity to rethink the way we do monetary policy, which Juan is on the committee that oversees, so I won't go into it too much. I'll let him if he wants to, but just to say, I'm not sure that that's necessarily accurate moving forward.
I want to meet the press credit for putting that in my mind. So,
Yeah.
Mitch,
if you really want to know the way to be,
hey.
the way to be less depressed about American politics is to stop watching the Sunday shows.
Okay.
But the other thing I'll say is, like, yes, there's a lot more we need to do on poverty. And many of you know that I've been working on this issue for a long time. This is core to my heart. Let's also not forget what we have done. The child tax credit in the American Rescue Plan cut childhood poverty in this country in half.
Right.
Now, it is unconscionable that we are now letting those same families fall back into poverty because we haven't been able to extend it. But we were able to cut childhood poverty in half with the expanded child tax credit, which we know how to do, which is eminently passable. And so I think that I think we just need to be clear that there are these big things we need to address.
Okay.
But we're also have been able to make significant progress with the tools we already have and already know what to do with. And then the last thing I'll say is that, first of all, there was housing. funding for housing in the Build Back Better Act. I think we ended up getting 300 billion, even in the final 1.5 trillion version of it, in part because of the leadership of Chairwoman Waters, who's the chair of Juan's committee, who pushed very forcefully on that issue because she knows we need it here in California. And undoubtedly, it's true that it makes it difficult, that it's mostly states run by Democrats that have housing and high cost of living issues. I think it does mean we need to do some self-reflection of ourselves as a party on why even in the places that we are controlling, we can't get some of these issues under control, and we're still seeing so much inequality, because that's on us. We can't blame the Republicans here in California, right? But of course, but it's also why us as federal representatives work very hard to make sure that we're taking that into account. So I'll give you one example. In the Build Back Better Act, in the childcare funding, after it was clear we weren't going to get it to be universal because of a senator's objection. I'll let you guess which senator.
I learned that one from Meet the Press too.
Yeah, I worked really hard with leadership in the House to make sure that we were incorporating high cost of living areas like San Diego into the cutoff levels we were doing. And I got included in the provision for there to be a 250% state median income cutoff instead of a 150%, so that families in places like San Diego that are high cost could still have access to that funding. And so yes, the Senate has a lot of structural problems. I'm very frustrated by them for many reasons, but there's also a lot that we're doing in the House to make sure that we're still getting help to high cost areas like San Diego.
Thank you very much. Congressman Vargas, you have 30 seconds, and then we got to move to Supervisor Vargas, but I always love hearing your thoughts.
Well, I have to tell you that housing is the thing that it really makes people poor in California. And it's a tough issue. I think the Madam President has done a good job, and so has Todd. It's about density. You know, at the end of the day now, you have to have density. And when you buy that single family home, and now you don't want anyone else to have apartments in your neighborhood, you're part of the problem.
Right.
You're part of the problem.
Part of the problem.
And the reality is we have to have density, because on one side we have the ocean, on the other side we have the mountains, on the other side we got Tijuana, on the other side we got Camp Pendleton. We don't have a lot of place to keep spreading out like the rest of the country. So what do you have to do? You got to go up. You have to have density. And if you don't want density, then you're going to have a lot of homeless people, and you have a lot of poor people, and you have prices that are going to be sky high. And the only people to blame are ourselves on that. Sorry, that's reality.
That's the reality. I agree. I drove by someone this morning who was holding a sign up on a corner that said "Protect single family neighborhoods, no density," and they don't get it. They don't get it. But of course, they already have their home, so that's the problem. Congressman Vargas, Congressman Jacobs, thank you. I know you guys are probably going to stay around. Wonderful, wonderful answers to questions. We're now going to pivot to the next partner in this discussion, and that is the County of San Diego. And for those of you who have not been paying attention, they've been busy this year. I want to welcome to this discussion Supervisor Nora Vargas, a longtime friend and someone who has not been afraid to talk about the issues of the county that have long been talked about behind the scenes. She's made them public, and she's made them a focus. And so welcome, Supervisor Vargas. We again, to the forum today and the discussion of what this infrastructure package really means. And some of the things that you missed, I'll just do a recap of one of the people, someone that said in the chat box, talk about it. It's about bridge and road repair. We talked about the number of unpaved miles of streets and roads in the city of San Diego, and D4 and D8 in particular. It's about improving Amtrak access. And I made a comment about an Amtrak station in National City at some point. It's about bridges and roads, and it's about broadband, and it's all these things. Talk a little bit about the county's conversations, and I want to take this opportunity to make a statement. What Ellen Nash is leading, and we've talked about this in BAPAC, is you will all receive a letter of the priorities that are most important to BAPAC and the community and district, and be with very great clarity, because these are the things that we want the community to focus on, seeing happen and achieve. But talk a little bit about where your focus is, Supervisor Vargas, and what you've talked about at the county and where you want to start first.
Well, first and foremost, I want to say thank you for the invitation, and it's wonderful to see you, Mitch, and I'm so glad to see all of you. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. And I was able to hear my good friends, both Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs and my Congressman Juan Vargas, the conversation around the work that they've done. And I just want to say thank you to the congressional delegation for their work and advocacy. I think they've said it, and I think we've all said it, no one has seen this type of historic investment in our communities. We've never seen this. I mean, I remember being a staffer in Congress for many, many years ago, and so I'm excited to see the investment infrastructure and in our communities. But I think where the county plays such a critical and pivotal role is ensuring that those funds that are now available, that we're actually investing in our communities, because honestly, I think there's a lot of work to be done so that we can uplift our working families and that we are creating new good paying union jobs and jobs for that are going to address some of the issues around the climate crisis. I think that there's obviously our communities are going to greatly they're going to be able to benefit from the investments around highways and public transit and energy efficiency. And I feel like I serve in a capacity right now as chair of SANDAC's Transportation Committee to be able to look at these investments and make sure that we are translating them from an equity lens, right? And so in our communities, folks have been fighting for no-cost transit for our youth for years and years. And these resources that were made available allowed me to be able to work with my colleagues so that as chair of transportation, we were able to invest $8 million for a no-cost transit for youth ages 18 and under, as well as to improve transit services. So we created now a pilot program that was launched in late March that is going to allow us to be able to do this work. And that would have never happened if these resources weren't available through the county. And so the county started the process. SANDAC revisited its budget, and we were able to do this and in partnership with so many other folks. And so it's shifting the way we're doing our work. The work that we're doing around economic recovery, right? I was able to introduce with Chair Fletcher, the Office of Economic Prosperity and Economic and Community Development. And often folks talk about, well, why not only economic development? And I think for me, I think we need to start thinking outside the box. And it's not just about, and obviously our chambers of commerce play such an important role with our small businesses, but we also need to think about our informal communities and how do we engage our communities of color so that they are also participating in this process. And so I think many of you know, and actually this Wednesday, there's going to be the second and final hearing to our ordinance so that MECOS is available for our communities, right? Innovative solutions that we champion so that these micro enterprises, so that communities who are folks in our communities are able to actually use their skills so that they can not only supplement their incomes in some cases, but in others, use this as an opportunity to just survive. And so these home-based food businesses are going to uplift non-traditional food entrepreneurs who are usually women, people of color, immigrants, and other facing barriers that sometimes have a hard time, starting up a brick and mortar restaurant or anything like that. And so, for me, one of my top priorities this year is also food sovereignty. It's a priority for 2022. We've already secured about $20 million in total funding, including $9 million for expansion of food distribution for senior meals, including $7 million for community gardens, $2 million to increase Más Fresco for nutrition incentive programs, and then $1 million for nutrition incentive programs beyond the SNAP program. And so there's a lot of work that we are doing. We've also included launching the Little Libraries initiative so that we can improve literacy, the literacy gap, and create opportunities for access to culturally and age-appropriate books. I'm excited to see more work and more funding for parks, right? I think in my district alone, we've been able to do that. So I can go on and on about how we have done a lot more work in the county. But what I will say is that I think, the first thing that we did this year in the last year in the county, I've been there a year now, is the first thing that we did was make sure that the county, declared racism a public healthcare crisis. And then after that, we were able to use, everything that we did. We made sure that health equity was the foundation of the work that we were doing. And so as we are starting to distribute the funds, we were doing it from that lens and from that perspective. And so I am really excited about the work that's happening. And I know that there's a lot more work that we can be doing. And I know that with Andrew Strong leading the Office of Race and Equity, I know that we can't have only one person trying to shift the culture of a whole county, but I know that together we are really striving to make a difference.
So Supervisor Vargas, let me pivot you to a question. Was one of the questions a couple of times that's come up today is with the infrastructure package now being doled out to the states and we're focused on where the money comes in. What are the opportunities in your mind around partnerships and collaborations with the city of San Diego, because you have this overlap, I talked in the introduction around there's money for pipes. We have an aging infrastructure in the city and the county, and in the city of San Diego, I think we'd all love to see money that's in the infrastructure bill come down and really help us replace these aging water pipes that continue to break and create havoc. There's again this focus on broadband. One of the things that we learned in this during the pandemic, and especially in certain communities, is that broadband and the digital divide are still real problems. And I made a comment earlier that on the Housing Commission, I've asked the staff, we should have a goal that we create better broadband access at every single Housing Commission property that we control. It is inexcusable to be here in 2022 and to have these problems. But talk a little about those areas and and the partnership opportunities around some of the infrastructure improvements and how they can happen.
I mean, I see the mayor here, right? And I see so many of other elected officials that are here that are such great friends and colleagues. And I'll tell you that I think one of the things that you're seeing, we have a whole new board of supervisors. And the great thing about it is that we are really working together collaboratively. I mean, I think the mayor will tell you that we are doing more work for the Tijuana River Valley. And of course, Congressman Vargas, who just stepped out, around this issue, knowing that this is a priority, right? Stormwater is one of our, as the mayor likes to talk about, sexy issues, is one of our sexy issues that we're talking about, allocating additional dollars to ensure that our communities are taken care of. And so I think, broadband was another key issue. As a former trustee for Southwestern College, and I see Dr. Tina King here, right? For years, we fought to make sure that people had access not only to broadband, but to the hardware. And what we saw during the pandemic was, that we were able to break down barriers to actually get people the resources that they needed. And I think that's the new mentality that we need to have as elected officials. And I think that's what you're seeing at the county, right? We're pushing to make sure that you're not just talking about, what we're going to do in 5 or 10 years, but we're actually making these changes immediately. And so one of the things that I am really proud of is that when the funding came down for broadband, what used to happen before is that the funding would be divided between 5. Well, let's be clear about how Congress was intentional about ensuring that this funding was really focused on where were the communities that were hardest hit. And so my goal was to say, how do we do this in an equity matter? And so what we did is we made sure that we use those resources for communities like San Isidro, right? So that we used it in areas like District 1 in Chula Vista. And in the old way of doing things for the County of San Diego, we would have only done it in the unincorporated areas. And so for me, when we're talking about the region and who we are as a county, we need to be looking at how do we fight for equity from that lens of partnerships. And I think that's the beauty of this new board and having those partnerships with our mayors and our council members to really get things done, and doing it from a data-driven, equity-minded focus. And I think Ellen has, continued to remind us how important that is. And I think that for me has continued to be a priority. And I have been and will continue to be that voice on the board of supervisors.
You mentioned something that's important that I do think about you in your comments, and you talked about the increased amount of communication that's occurring between the county board and the city and the city of San Diego and the cities in general. And that is something that is very important. We only on as we've just celebrated the Martin Luther King anniversary. There was something that Dr. King believed, which was the power of people in the collective, and government operating together is essential. What we talked about today is the congressional delegation, worked hard, made the tough votes to create the infrastructure package. Now it's in the hands of the state. Madam Pro Tem had talked a lot about what the state is focused on. Now it's coming down to the county and the cities. What the county and the cities do together is really what makes a difference every single day to the residents of this region and that collaborative. And so, we've all been focused on the pandemic and how we get through it, but now we're focused on how we bring change through this package on infrastructure, real change, things that we've talked about for years. And so I have one last question, one or two final questions for you, Supervisor Vargas, and that is when you think about, you mentioned like the Tijuana River Valley, I think one of the things that we always ask ourselves is, will we wake up one day and we won't hear about sewage spills closing down the beaches in South Bay? We talk about, transportation and being able to get people, move people from point A to point B much faster. And you and Councilwoman Stepp, you govern over areas that see the impact of the transportation woes on the 805 every day during a normal time. And you see the impacts of crumbling infrastructure. I mean, talk about what you'd love, in a perfect world, when 5 years from now, what are the greatest things that can occur because of this infrastructure package and that collaboration to address those issues in your mind?
So I would love to be able to see, and hello, Councilmember Montgomery Stepp, it's good to see you. For me, I would love to see in 5 years, no cost transportation for everyone, right? Our seniors, it's really expensive for our seniors to get around. Our aunts who try to get from point A to B, for it to be safe, for them to be able to get around, and for it to be efficient and on time, which is, I know, something that we're all working on. Serving as the chair of transportation for me, and when we're looking at the equity lens, how do we make sure that we are going to be able to meet our climate action goals while at the same time not creating a burden for our communities, that are going to be challenged by trying to get on electric vehicles, right? And so on and so forth. So for me, I think I really want to make sure that as we're thinking about policies and we are thinking about how we're going to move forward, that we're keeping in mind our communities of concern when we're making these policy decisions and not creating burdens for them, that they're not the ones that are going to pay the burden for everybody else. Because the people who can get on the Tesla, they're going to be okay, right? I mean, I don't want them to be getting on Teslas, but I'm more concerned about the person who lives in San Isidro. How do they get to San Diego City College? How do they get to Southwestern College? How do we make that easy for them so that they can actually be able to get an education and not be able to compete and be able to participate and get a job? I mean, my niece tries to get to school. It still takes her 2 hours to get, she's an intern with the city attorney from San Isidro to the city attorney's office is about an hour and 40 minutes. And then she has to get to Southwestern College, right? I mean, it's really tough. And so I want us to make it simple for people to get around so that they can have a good quality of life. Your zip code and your income should not determine your opportunities. And that's unfortunately what is happening right now. And that's why I wake up every day trying to fight to make sure that our communities have it a little bit better.
I appreciate that comment, and thank you very much for that answer. And I will, before I turn it over to the mayor and Councilwoman Stepp, I want to say that, you're so right. We recently received a project at a housing commission for approval, and the project was in Otay. And I asked the staff the question, because where they were building it, I said it was nowhere near any of the trolley lines. And I'm not sure what the MTS structure was. And I asked the staff, how are families who move into this project supposed to get to and from? And that's one of the things that we've asked the staff to do a better job of, is to map out how someone's supposed to get around, because it's so important. It's great if you have a job, but if you can't get to the job easily, that is a burden that no one should have to go through. So Thank you very much, Congresswoman, or Supervisor Vargas. I
Thank
know
you.
you might want to run for Congress someday, and you and I have been friends a long time. So, I'm not saying that you're running, but at some point you might.
No, tell Congressman Vargas I'm not running for Congress. I'm good. I love my job. I love my job. Thank you very much. Don't
Okay,
start rumors.
we will now pivot to the next partner, a key partner for a lot of people on this discussion, City of San Diego. And joining us today are Mayor Gloria and Councilwoman Montgomery Stepp. We're going to start with Mayor Gloria, and I want to set the table. The councilman has heard some of this conversation, and what we've talked about today is once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunity because of the infrastructure package coming here. And Mr. Mayor, I mentioned the fact that what was really appalling to some of us last year was the report that came out that talked about the unpaved roads and alleys, which Councilman Stepp has known about. We've all known about it. And there was this report that put it out there that D4 and D8, 10 miles and 12 miles respectively, unpaved roads and alleys. So now there's been this big focus on the infrastructure package. And the question that we are all asking today in this forum is, what does it really mean to the community? And more importantly, the specifics. I mean, we're going to wake up and the roads are going to be better and the pipes are going to be fixed and we're going to have better broadband connection because we now have discovered the impact of the pandemic really shined a bright light on. There is a digital divide problem that still exists today, and it's not just unfortunate, it's unacceptable, but can the infrastructure package really help us? So with that, I'll start with you, Mr. Mayor. Give us your thoughts on the infrastructure package, what it means to you, and what you're working with your colleagues at City Hall, in particular, Councilman Montgomery Stepp, to accomplish.
Council President Pro Tem.
Council President Pro Tem.
Let's just recognize, right?
Right.
Mitch, thank you. BAPAC, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Visited with you many times in the past, but I think this is my first time as mayor, so appreciate the invitation to talk about what Vice Chair Vargas was just saying. You all know this is the subject I love. I love me some infrastructure. I like paving roads, like fixing stuff. And what this bottom line means is that we'll do more of that because it's a resource issue, right? Let it never be said that there's a surplus. There's just unmet needs that can be more met when we have additional dollars. And that's what this does. I want to, first off, just thank the congressional delegation. I know we have some members or their staffs who are present. Let's be really clear. None of this would exist if it wasn't for their hard work and support. And so I appreciate all of them. Special shout out to Stacey Abrams for giving us critical votes to actually let us pass a bipartisan infrastructure bill. Who knew that the organized on the ground in Georgia would make a difference in San Diego, but it does. And let us thank those who do community organizing. But Mitch, I want to maybe share some facts, and forgive me if this has already been covered, because I think there are, it's a new law. And so we have to get our arms around what exactly this means. And there's a couple place setting comments I'd like to make. Number one is very little of this money goes directly to the city of San Diego. Money does go directly to the airport authority, to the port, MTS, Sandag. Money the city will get will largely be competitive dollars. And that's an important distinction. A lot of those dollars will go for the state and come down to the city, but it's not a direct allocation. So Council President Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp and I are going to have to hustle. We're going to have to compete. And you know me, I'm willing to work hard every day of the week. I'm Lionel Richie, baby. I'm going to work every day to get these monies, all right, all night long. So we have to do that now. So now that you know that, we have to hustle, there's no checks that are being sent. Unlike the American Rescue Plan, where we did get $300 million, this we have to hustle for. So what are we doing? Two things. One is we have an internal working group of the appropriate department directors, deputy chief operating officers, myself and my staff, council input, to make sure that we're vetting our projects to figure out what we have internal that can compete. And then the second thing we've done under the leadership of our government affairs department is have an external working group of relevant regional agencies. So the city and the county, you were talking about city-county collaboration, the county, the airport authority, other local government groups working together so that if the city of San Diego, I'll be really clear, if we have a C+ application and the county has an A- one, we're gonna submit the county one, because we want our region to get as much money as possible. While we'd like to think that everyone lives and works in the city of San Diego, we know a lot of folks live in the city, but work in the county. They may live in El Cajon, but commute to the city. You get my point. So we all should be collaborating, because these dollars are competitive, to make sure that we're putting forward the most competitive proposals. Otherwise, LA, San Francisco, other states are going to get more of our money, right?
Right.
So that's the stage setting. Now, the last thing I want to mention, because I want to make sure the Council President Pro Tem has some time to comment, and then certainly for questions that folks may have, is that the groundbreaking work that Monica did to establish the Office of Race and Equity was really fortuitous, because when that was established, I'm sure there were questions. As we were proposing the budget, recruiting the staff member, some people were asking, well, what's equity got to do with infrastructure? And Mitch, you mentioned, we have 33 miles of unpaved roads in the city, 23 of which are in districts 4 and 8.
Yeah.
And we all know the historically African-American district, historically Latino district. This is why equity has to touch the issue of infrastructure. And I want to be clear, this doesn't mean that we don't pave roads in La Jolla or in other communities. Clearly we must. Many of the folks who live in D4 may work in La Jolla, and so that's going to benefit them too. But the point is that we have a deficit in those communities. We're talking potholes in Claremont, we're talking paving roads for the first dirt roads in Canto, right? That's the difference. So what I'm trying to say is that when Monica established that office, when I hired the chief equity officer, what we've done is have the table set so that when President Biden came in with the bipartisan infrastructure package and said, you must consider equity in how you dole out these dollars, we were already ready.
Sure.
And so on Wednesday, when I had the opportunity to meet with Mitch Landrieu, the former mayor of Louisiana, who's the president's lead on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, understand and know that this man was very impressed that we have already put together equity in our work, that sustainability, we have a Department of Sustainability, the boxes that the president has laid out and say, if you want this money, you need to have this. We have done that. So thank you to the Congress for establishing this opportunity. We have the internal working group, the external working group, and we have the equity sustainability components that are there. I'm hopeful that we can get this more money to the community. And the last thing I'll probably say is that this won't be done overnight. And that isn't me trying to lowball your expectations, but the fact of the matter is that we have some, once we get those dollars, then we have to let out the contracts. And that's the next piece of equity, right? Making sure those dollars go to local businesses that are willing to hire Black and brown people, or who may be Black or brown owned businesses, women owned businesses. Some of that process may mean that it'll take a couple of years to pave those roads. But I'll tell you, in the meantime, our general fund dollars are going to do things like pave Imperial and Skyline and Woodman, San Ysidro Boulevard. That's the dollars that we have today. So we're not going to just hang out. We're going to do some work. But the dollars from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it may take some time to get there. But the focus right now is making sure that we're competitive and we get as many bucks for San Diego as possible.
Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for those comments. And as you were saying that, it brought to mind the song that Donna Summer wrote once, she works hard for the money. You want to work hard for the money. And I want to say that everybody is appreciative of that focus. One thing before I go to Council President Pro Tem Montgomery Steppe is that you both understand how this game is played. I mean, you're right. The money isn't direct. We have to compete for it. And Mr. Mayor, you had the wonderful opportunity to be in Sacramento for all those years, and you saw how aggressive and how fast the money gets sucked up by LA and San Francisco. And I often tell people that first time I ever was in LA, and I didn't know that the red line, the purple line, the gold line existed. But the first time I rode them, I said, boy, we have to work harder to try and achieve what they're achieving, because they're getting a bunch of money. And so, thank you for your comments. Council President Pro Tem Montgomery Steppe, you are in a very unique position to lead this discussion. And I also want to say thank you for what you did on the focus of equity, because I think people have heard me say this before. There are those that wanted that conversation and that phrase of equity to be a momentary phrase, and that we would move on and forget about it. The office that the city set up says it's not going to be just a momentary. It's going to be our new lens and how we guide ourselves. Talk a little bit about what your expectation is as you look at this infrastructure package and what it truly can mean for your district and for the city.
Yeah, let me just start off by saying, hello, Mitch, good to see you. Good to see everyone. And this is just such an important conversation. And it is music to my ears to see the alignment of all of the different levels of government that have been on this call today, because we just have not had that. And it is up to us. We're really in this moment where we have to set a new foundation, and it's possible because of where everyone is strategically placed right now. So I'm really just grateful to hearing all these different perspectives and all of this knowledge for people who work really, really hard for our region. So I want to just add on to what the mayor has said. He may remember in one of our first one-on-ones. Of course, you know, we're old friends. He's the first person that hired me at City Hall. But one of our one-on-ones, for our first one-on-ones as elected officials, I talked about infrastructure and just, you know, my concern was that we needed to be prepared, right? In the event that money was to come down from the federal government. And my focus was twofold. Of course, it was about the actual infrastructure projects that need to be done via capital improvement projects in the city of San Diego on our budget, but also the staff. How are we going to get the labor to complete these projects, right? So that was twofold. And since that time, the mayor really, in the last, his last budget, he introduced $40 million for infrastructure projects in districts 4, 8, and 9. And so I think in addition to, you know, the institution of the Office of Race and Equity, which is, you know, what this, we're in a good position right now. But in addition to that, he set up a structure to where we already know how to fund equitably with regard to infrastructure dollars. So very appreciative of that. We're already seeing, we're not seeing it on the ground yet, but he issued a memo with a lot of streets that have been neglected for a very long time. And, you know, District 4A and 9 got the bulk of that funding. And part of the problem with the previous administration was that it was the opposite of equity, right? Just looking at, if I can go out here and say that I paved 1,000 miles, it doesn't matter where those streets were. It doesn't matter the conditions of those streets. I just want to be able to say that, right? And so now we have the opportunity to really dig in. Why is it that our older streets in District 4 look the way we do? And so Councilmember Moreno had introduced a policy that changed around our alleyways, but also we're looking at, it may be cheaper to just slurry seal a street, but if we continue on that route, the older streets in our communities will never get attention because the answer will always be it's too expensive, that we have to completely reconstruct that street. We don't want to do that. And we want to be able to say, we paved 1,000 miles in a month or whatever. And so we're that was the focus before. Now it's completely different. So it will take more time because there has been more damage. We have lost time, but it will take more time, but we're doing it right. I truly believe that, and I am all for that. I think that we have to set the foundation so that those that come after us don't have to go through this sort of external and internal struggle, changing people's mindsets about how we think about how we spend these dollars. So I just wanted to mention that $40 million allocation before we, you know, got this word that we were maybe eligible for some of the infrastructure dollars coming down. So I will be focused on trying to build our labor pool, because I do think that as these things go hand in hand, infrastructure and economics, and I've always been a proponent since even when I ran, standing out in front of Malcolm X Library, folks putting solar panels up. And I had a press conference at that time, nobody cared. So no, you know, the press wasn't there, but I'll still call it a press conference. But we stood out there and said, look, these folks are from Vegas doing this work. How can we in our community get folks from our community to do the work in our community so we can continue to live in our community? So when we talk about gentrification, we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about economic opportunity. Yep. This is a great opportunity to not work in the silos that we have worked on in the past, and really accomplish those things for the people that live in the communities that we need to improve, so that when we improve them, they don't have to move out.
So well said. So well said. You know, yeah. I want to take this opportunity to say that, you know, I've been really impressed with, you know, Ellen, Regina. You know, we've all talked about the same thing, Council President Pro Tem, which is, you know, we're working with Peter at Workforce Partnership. We want to make sure we're getting people ready for this opportunity that is unprecedented that we face, and that is those are the steps. You talked about setting up the Office of Race and Equity, and the mayor talked about you've done these things so that DC knows that we're ready. And can you there are questions that are coming in that I'm gonna try and shape here in our remaining moments of time. There are, I think what everybody's hearing on this, on the infrastructure package is, again, it's $1 trillion. And, we need to, get our fair share, as you both said. We have to compete for that money, get our fair share. There are questions about what the money can be used for. I've seen in the chat box a number of times around lights, street lighting, and can it be used to help create and change, make a much needed focus and transformation of street lighting. Can you answer that question first on what are the thoughts around street lighting?
For me, yeah, absolutely. It's a multifaceted problem. It's infrastructure aging, and lights are part of that. It's a lack of having the design and planning for additional street lights in certain communities. I always talk about public safety and crime prevention by environmental design, and that's a part of it, having more lighting in our streets, and been advocating for that for a while. But there's also the labor issue. Where we're doing better at the city. We're able to increase our employees' income this past year. We're now going back into a pension system, so we're now competitive again. But we need people to work on the lights, and so that's why there's such a backlog, as there are in other areas in infrastructure. Certainly not an excuse. It's just something that we're trying to work through as fast as we can, because we know it's important for our communities. And again, when we have these singular conversations, even about public safety and reform, I think that's part of reform. Sure. I think lighting up our communities that have been historically underserved is part of reform, because it's a deterrent, and it also gives a better quality of life. Like, hey, I like where I live, So I think it's super important, and we're just having to take a multifaceted approach to trying to solve the issues. Just real quick, this may have been mentioned before, but for the infrastructure bill, there is a focus, the Justice 40 initiative, that 40% of that funding can go to disadvantaged communities. Yes. So I really want to be looking at and monitoring that. That's our job on the local level, to make sure that we can make that happen locally as well.
Yeah, it was 40% for disadvantaged communities, and also 10% for DBEs and small business of the money. And so there are some huge opportunities. Mr. Mayor, do you want to add anything on the light?
I echo everything that Council President Pro Tem said. I would just add, we have a unique situation with streetlights right now, and I think that folks probably know about this, because I know you're calling D4, you're calling my office, but to share with the broader group and whoever else may end up seeing this, the city, as Monica mentioned, has been not an employer of choice. When you're snatching people's retirement benefits, when you're snatching other benefits, when you hold pay steady for like a decade, guess what? People don't want to come work for you. I see our former council president is here, who did some work to get us in position. We're trying to carry on and build off of what Georgette Gomez did to be an employer of choice, which is to say that those employees now do get retirement benefits. So, if you're choosing between Chula Vista to give you a pension and San Diego that doesn't, it doesn't take a genius to know people aren't going to come work for us. But that said, we probably have just a handful of electricians when we should have dozens on staff. And what that means is that when those lights go out, we literally don't have the personnel to go do the work. I'm trying to address that right now. One thing that we've identified is we haven't actually acquired the equipment to fix some of these stupid lights, which is just dumb, right? I mean, if you have folks going out to try and fix a street light and they don't have the diagnostic equipment to do it, then you understand why it takes days, weeks, or months to fix them. We're going to buy that equipment, Mitch, because it's going to save us a lot more money in the long run. And the last thing I would say, because equity does matter in infrastructure investment, as we get through this huge backlog of streetlights, like if you call the city today, we're probably going to tell you it's going to take us a year to fix that light. Again, this is unrelated to Build Back Better, to the infrastructure bill or finances. It's just staffing. So given if you have a huge workload, how do you prioritize? Well, we're saying we're going to prioritize with equity. So we're going to look where the complaints came in. We're going to look at communities that have, the lowest light standards, the places where there are maybe higher levels of crime, because as Monica mentioned, this is a great way to try and address crime prevention. And so we are going to do that way, but this is unrelated to the funding issue. This has to do with the fact that, there are really right-wing folks that were trying to run around this town for a long time and really decimated the city's workforce. We're in the process of repairing that, but you can't fix the 8th largest city in the country's streetlights with only 5 or 6 people. You need to do it with an army of folks, and we're trying to hire that army and staff them and equip them appropriately.
I wanted to just add one thing on that. The city of San Diego, one of the things that's wonderful about the character of the city is you have neighborhoods who still have the old light post from the 30s and 40s that, it's part of the charm. And you can't just walk into Costco and buy a replacement part for those. We've sat through a number of those conversations, and you're right. This is going to take some infrastructure in the people, but also focus and vision. Let's flip to another conversation that ties into the infrastructure discussion and the collaborative. There's money in there, and this seems to align with the city's climate infrastructure focus. And one of the things I thought about when I saw the budget number in the infrastructure package for climate adjustments, I think it's $50 billion to protect against droughts, heats, floods, wildfires, etc. $50 billion there's money coming to the state you're going to compete for. Have you started to think about what you would want to apply for and fund? And Council President Pro Tem, I've often thought that putting a battery at Market Creek so that you had a place that could hold a number of people during times of crisis and the power was going to be on makes sense. I asked you that question first, and Mr. Mayor, I would ask you this question. There was recently a report on the parks and the inequity on parks. And part of this is a funding issue, and you know this, and I know that the budget's what you have to grapple with every year to try and figure out how you do things. Is there an opportunity? Is there anything in the infrastructure package where the park problems can be addressed with this once in a generation money that's being presented? Is there anything you can talk about that? So those are the two questions. Council President Pro Tem, we'll start with you on the climate resilience piece.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, and agreed. As we move further to try to meet our climate action plan goals, battery storage should be, a big part of that conversation. And because we have this funding now, we can explore more ways to do that. And, one would be the San Diego Energy Equity Complex that we're building right in the heart of District 4. Is there a way that, that can have additional battery storage? I know we're already, looking at, it's a green energy equity complex. So yes. We're already looking at the EV charging and those things. But, as we build out, of course, we have to build differently. And so that's an example, certainly, of how storage can be used and charging can be there. And we can have that as a place of, refuge in the event that anything happens in our communities. And of course, we have to mention our pure water program at the city of San Diego as well. And so although that is like other things, actually, we're kind of more prepared in some of these areas than we get credit for at the city. But this is something, we've been working on this for a long time. And so a lot of this, we have some infrastructure, no pun intended, for this funding to really, so that we can operationalize this funding appropriately.
Wonderful. Mr. Mayor, you want to talk about parks?
Sure. I think the issues that were illuminated in recent press coverage about our parks really has to do about maintenance issues, right? And that honestly is the same answer as the electrician issue, right? We pay our park maintenance workers about $18 an hour. And that's just, that's not going to cut it. It wasn't cutting it before the pandemic. It's going to be even less feasible going forward. You're going to see us continue to propose reasonable raises to make sure that we're competitive in the marketplace. And I could use BAPAC's help so that when that article comes out, asking why we dare pay employees a livable wage, I want you to have my back. I want you to have the Council President Pro Tem's back on this. Because let's be really clear, most of those workers are workers of color. Yep. And those folks deserve to be paid a living wage, right? So I'm gonna need your help on that, because we can mow the lawn a lot more frequently, we could pick up the garbage more frequently and paint out the graffiti faster if we had more hands. Many hands make light work. Right now we have a few amount of hands covering a whole lot of parks. So to your question, Mitch, I don't believe that the infrastructure package is going to help us to address ongoing operations and maintenance. It's just going to be good governance. And again, you're going to see us at the bargaining table. I see David Garcia is here. He knows a thing or two about that. We're going to be at the bargaining table, making sure that we do right by our employees, because we recognize it's not necessarily about paying them. It's about providing services in the neighborhood. The last thing I would just say on that front is don't fall asleep on the state. Mitch, you mentioned a moment ago, getting up to LA and whatnot. We have really an unprecedented opportunity because of the leadership of Senate President Pro Tem Atkins.
Absolutely.
Last year, she brought us back in concert with our other friends in the state legislature, folks like Dr. Keela Weber and others, $250 million. $250 million for projects like in Monica's district, in Balboa Park, repairing the Ocean Beach Pier. That stuff was possible there. So if we can take some good governance at the local level, match it with some state money and pull down some federal money, you can see how we start cooking with grease around here. So let's make sure that we use this powerhouse of a state delegation that we have to get even more for San Diego.
Well, you're so right, Mr. Marion. You've been there and you know the window of opportunity. While you have the council president, while you have the Senate Pro Tem as a friend and someone who loves and supports this region, you know, this is the right time to have those conversations and build and bring those wonderful additions back to this region. So I would agree with you. We have time for a couple more questions for the two of you. You know, and I'm glad you answered the question on parks, Mr. Mayor, because I think what we're trying to create here with BAPAC and the list of priorities is we want people to focus on what we can assume is possible, and we want them to understand what isn't possible and where this money can be utilized. You know, there's money in there for, again, mass transit. Big discussion in the city. Give us your thoughts around how mass transit, what we should be focused on in mass transit that will benefit the city of San Diego and the San Diego region, because it's a big discussion. And as I mentioned, I marvel when I go to LA. I will say this editorial: the city of LA getting the Olympics in 2028 will do more with their mass transit system because of the Olympics coming. And I can only hope that we ever get a chance to get the Olympics here and take advantage of it. If you've ever been to cities that get the Olympics, their mass transit system goes from mediocre to miraculously fantastic. But talk about this mass transit opportunity in the infrastructure bill.
Well, I think it's kind of apples and oranges when talking about LA to us.
Yeah.
Not because I don't believe we're a big, great city and we're better than LA. And I say that as a native San Diegan. So, you know, to say something crummy about Los Angeles and you'll have won my heart. Here's the deal. You know, they've passed multiple local ballot measures that fund their transit. And we have one, Transnet. It's a half cent. A fraction of it goes to transit. And as a consequence, we have the system that we have. We could do something different, but it will take a vote of the people. And the people of LA have gone to the ballot multiple occasions to really invest in transit in a way that we haven't here locally. In terms of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, you're right. And as I mentioned at the beginning, those dollars flow directly to MTS and SANDAG. So they will get a healthy allocation of those funds. And a lot of that is the O&M, the operations and maintenance money. That's the pay the driver money, right? And I think that that's meaningful, because what I hear from folks beyond wanting to see the network expand is they want the buses to come more frequently. They want the hours of operation to go longer and more often. What happens if you work the third shift and the buses don't run when you get off work? That's a common issue in San Diego. And the fares, you know, whether you make them, you hold the line on fare increases, or in some cases, as is our vision in our new regional transportation plan, to have free transit, that really requires the money to come from somewhere. And I'm here to tell you all, Transnet is running low. We are running out of money at Transnet, and it's going to make us have to make a lot more difficult choices over the next number of years as those dollars dry up. The bipartisan infrastructure bill may help bridge some of that gap. But ultimately, if we want what LA has, in my judgment, it won't take an Olympics, although that's nice. And I kind of think we may be able to get an event or two down here when the Olympics are in LA in a couple of years. But it's going to take a permanent funding source that's more robust than the one that we have.
Right. So well said, Mr. Mayor. You're right. Again, this forum is about figuring out what's possible, what's not, and the big component of that is an additional tax. But for those of you who have never seen the LA system, you should take a look and try it. Council President Pro Tem, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, with regard to transportation, you know, I sit on the MTS board, and we just had this discussion on Thursday about money running out. And although there are a lot of different opinions about, you know, how we should move forward, it's just true that we have not quite invested as much as some of the other larger cities have in this area. Now, we always make do with what we have. But my concern is as these funds dwindle, it's always our most vulnerable communities that, you know, experience the first hits. And an example of that is youth opportunity passes, where community advocates have been asking for youth opportunity passes for years and years and years. We finally get a pilot program funded, and now, you know, there's this discussion about taking, you know, all new projects, so to speak, off of the table because of this Transnet issue. So, you know, we have to be mindful that, you know, a lot of these programs really service our most vulnerable communities. And that's also when we have the discussion about paying our city employees, our municipal employees, because it really is the people of color and Black people in particular have been the foundation and beneficiaries of the public sector, because for so long the private sector was allowed to discriminate heavily, right? And so there's been a concerted effort to, you know, sort of vilify that public employee, right? And so we're fighting through, and I talk about, you know, changing the mentality even within the system. You know, we are fighting through all of that. And as we do, we'll become an even more healthy city. But my last thing I want to say is that we, and I know the mayor is big on this, we still have the major responsibility to be fiscally responsible. When we go to the ballot and ask the public to continue to invest in our city, we have to have shown that we have been efficient with the money that we do have. And so, yeah, it's a large conversation, many different thought processes we have, even amongst our transportation leaders in the region, but we're working through all of that because, again, these are the services that impact our most vulnerable, period. You know, they cost more to take public transportation sometimes than other means of getting around. So we want to invest for sure.
I appreciate it. You know what, I know we have time. We're about to end this on time, as I promised Ms. Allen that we would. I want to just end with one quick question for you, Council President Pro Tem. There's been a discussion about the aging infrastructure in D4, D8, D9, and a lot of this tends to be created by the imbalance on developer impact fees and funds. And do you have any thoughts about how you fix that piece so that you can be more aggressive?
Yeah, so with our Parks Master Plan that we just passed, there's a big discussion about diff fees and other fees. And one of the main reasons that I supported that plan and the previous housing plan that kind of mirrored it was that instead of having our separate communities have accounts for diff fees, which a lot of communities north of 8 that have also had facilities benefit assessments, additional money going in, you know, to maintain the infrastructure, which we did not have, you know, most of our neighborhoods south of the 8. Instead of having those buckets, put it all together and do an equitable distribution, which would benefit the communities that did not have those FBAs, and then have, you know, yes, sometimes we have larger diff fees in some of our communities, but there are also waivers, and, you know, it's putting it all together in a pot is very important, but it also goes back to, you know, say in Chicago, for example, they do have a tax assessed for parks only. Right. And so we have to be realistic about that. If we don't want to do something like that, then we have to figure out the ways of how to maintain our parks. One thing I will be committed to as we have these discussions about maybe increasing taxes and things in these areas, I'm always going to advocate for, and we have receipts that there's been major disinvestment in some of our communities more than others. And so my thing is, anything that comes in, the formula needs to be, let's make up for that disinvestment. That's it. I'm always going to take that stance.
You're right.
No matter what. So
this long overdue. This conversation's happening way too long. Has happened for way too long. Let's fix it. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause and thanks for everyone today, but in particular, I think here at the end, for those of you who are looking at the and live in the city in particular, you have to be impressed with what you heard from the mayor and President Pro Tem. I think that this has been a wonderful discussion. The next step, and Ms. Ellen, I'm going to turn it over to you to close, is going to be that our priority list, the priority list, the priority list, the priority list, and what we ask everybody to work together to achieve. This is not a one conversation and you will achieve success. This is, we're in this for the long run. And you heard the mayor say this, he's going to work hard for the money. You heard the president, you heard the Senate Pro Tem. We're going to keep focusing on the money, right? That's what it's going to take to address that collaborative, to address some of these issues. So I want to say thank you for being here today and for listening to me and Miss Ellen. I also will offer this. We have a couple other elected officials on, Ed Spriggs and Marcus Bush. Thank you for joining for this conversation today. Miss Ellen, the floor is yours. You have, and I think we're going to finish pretty much on time.
Great. I just wanted to give just a minute or two to our only Black male elected officials in San Diego, and that is our council member Ed Spriggs and also our National City Council member Marcus Bush. If you could just give us 1 minute, I want to acknowledge you as in the presence of all the other elected officials and this Zoom call. Thank you for being here. Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you very much. And as a lifetime member of BAPAC, it's really great to see your leadership and to see you pull together this kind of an event. And I really appreciate all the other elected officials and leaders for their comments and their support in trying to make San Diego and especially South County the beneficiary of some of these resources. This is a long neglected area. Imperial Beach is the primary beach for about 400,000 residents in South County, South Bay. And we really need to see some of these resources help us deal with the cross-border pollution issue and some of the other issues that affect low-cost recreational opportunities for this large population in the county. It's not just about Imperial Beach. So thank you very much for all the great comments. I just wanted to put that one out there as a last minute thought. Take care.
Great. Council member Marcus Bush.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Marcus Bush, a council member and vice mayor of the city of National City. And yeah, it's an honor to be here. And I heard some great comments from our biggest elected officials in the region, from the Mayor Todd Gloria, our supervisor, Supervisor Vargas, as well as our congressional delegation. And hearing all that, I don't want to repeat everything that is said. National City, it's a small city, 60,000, but also one of the most dense. And so we definitely we are a community of concern, as some call it, one that is, faced a lot of systemic issues and been ignored. And it has been to a big extent intentional, as Councilmember Montgomery, Council President Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp mentioned. And so I think finally, we're at a place where we're reversing all that. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to come quick. It's going to take a lot of time. So I think the infrastructure bill is a big step. Talked a little bit about Build Back Better. That's huge. I think it's $6 billion or something like that in affordable housing, maybe even more in affordable housing. And there's two Democrats in particular that are holding that up. And so I think that that and then the voting rights legislation. So I think just having that unity and solidarity, even if we can't have it on the national level, I love seeing it locally. So I think that's moving good. And then the other thing, just want to put a plug in for let folks know about is we are, this conversation happened last month at BAPAC about districting in National City, and Ken Samaji, a huge leader in a region and one of our constituents, he spoke about it, and I really appreciate him, speaking about it, moving forward, educating everyone about it. So we're going to have our first hearings starting next month, and want to invite everyone to those. I believe the next one, let me pull up my calendar, the next tentative district hearing, it looks like it's going to be February, let's see, the first one is Saturday, February 5th at 10 a.m. is the first meeting. And again, that's tentative, so it might change, and we'll keep folks in the loop. You can go to the City of National City website to look that up. It's really important when we talk about districting and representation. That's how, all of the different groups, Black, Latino, Filipino, API community, we don't have API representation. We need that. LGBTQ, I'm the only LGBTQ elected in my city. So we definitely need that representation, and it's important that BAPAC and you all be a part of that. So thank you, Ms. Ellen, and good afternoon to everyone else.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcus. I just wanted to just a couple of more minutes. I'm going to let you go because I'm hungry. I wanted to acknowledge all of the elected officials, and you all know my heart. Appreciate you all for being here. I'm not going to call you out because I really, you all know we love you. Thank you for all your longtime support of BAPAC, and thank you for being here. Thank you for being here, Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins. I think this may be one of her first visits since I've been chair of BAPAC, and I really appreciate. And you're still here. You spent time with her. Really appreciate that. I want to remind you that this is Facebook Live and YouTube, so you can always go back and look at it for years and years to come. And we're going to hold every one of you that's made promises on this call. We're going to go back to that Facebook Live and YouTube and remind you of that. This is an opportunity of a lifetime. And we are going to be, as Mitch talked about, we're going to be convening a group of stakeholders, including BAPAC, NAACP, our Black Leaders Connect, and all of you that are on this Zoom can join us. And we're going to identify our 5 top priorities for the community, but particularly for the Black community, which has been underserved and underrated and has the largest, as you know, disparities in all the categories across the board. And we're going to put together some goals and create some outcomes. And as Juan Vargas told us, that we're going to tell you how to spend the money to ensure that our Black community particularly benefits, and that we do build, as I say, build Black better from this awful pandemic. We are next month, the next couple of months, we'll be convening an AD 80th forum. We do have Georgette Gomez on the line, who is running for the 80th. And I think, and David Alvarez was going to be here as well. There may be others running, but I wanted to let you know, put you on notice that forum will be held in the next couple of months. That is a special election. I believe the residents of the 80th go to the polls in April. I may be wrong about that, but in April. So we have a short window to get the AD 80th filled. And again, I want to thank you all. It is 2:21. We are 20 minutes over. You know how we like to end on time at 2 o'clock, but this is worth all of the information. I want you all to have a great Saturday and Sunday, a great weekend, and we're going to roll up our sleeves. We're here. We stand with all of you in BAPAC and other organizations to make sure that we do build back better here in San Diego. God bless you all, and thank you very much.
Thank you.